Public testimony on P12017, 1404 Karen Drive rezoning. Who is here to present that?
My name is Shannon Block, and I own the property at 1404 Karen. And I guess I'd like to start by saying thanks for the continuance in the first place. It gave us valuable time to put together the PUD plan. Also gave me time to send out mailers and meet with neighbors to answer any questions or concerns that they've had along the way. I do believe that the plan that we submitted here addresses any of the issues that have been brought forward. And I guess really Eric's presentation was very informative. There's not a whole lot that I can add to that other than my vision all along has been to maintain the setting that is there. And in order to do that, it's going to require the smaller footprint that you see on the PUD plan. Yes, there are more numbers in that footprint, but I believe that there's actually going to be less traffic that way, as if the streets were connected and we were to get the 26 lots out of it. You know, though they would be single-family homes, most assuredly would have 3-bedroom homes, whereas these are two-bedroom units. So I think that's a pretty strong argument to say that it would be a less of an impact to go with something like this as opposed to the current zoning of RS4. Certainly would not be able to maintain the buffers presented in this plan with an RS4 development. Any questions?
Any questions of Mr. Block? Chris?
What would be your intention with that? I'm going to call it a pond.
Actually would like to keep it. It's part of the plan for stormwater retention. Okay. It would remain with water in it, though. One other thing I guess I could touch on, it's been my intention all along to have a complex. I do not want to sell lots. That's why it's not laid out as such for the rezone part of that property. I don't want to get into John managing his property different than Shannon does, and Jerry does his different. You know, whether they don't mow their grass or they allow their tenants to park junk cars around, whatever the issue might be. It's just going to be a lot easier for me to keep it the way I want it kept if I maintain the whole property. So that's my way of keeping it neat.
Any other questions, Mr. Block?
Yes. What I see is, if I understand this right, lots 2 and 3 that would be the single family that would butt up against the unused McKinley Street right-of-way. I'm not sure if I got the lot numbers right. That's how they appear on one of the drawings.
Yeah, I see that.
So you build the fourplexes, and those lots would be, you would build houses there, or you would offer them for sale for people to build houses there?
I build homes for a living. It's my intention to keep all the lots and build the homes.
You would build the single-family homes there, and
yes,
then,
yes.
And then rent them or sell them?
Sell them.
Sell them.
Yeah.
Okay.
No interest in keeping those.
Okay. I'm just wondering how much success there would be convincing someone to move in a single-family home there with the fourplexes right there when there's so many other places. My fear would be is that those lots would be vacant for a very long time, and then you'd want to do something else with them. You see, that's my...
Yeah, actually, it would be my first intention is to build the houses first.
Mm-hmm.
to recoup money put forward in the development of the road.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, Mr. Block?
Let me clarify something also. Within the PUD plan, if Mr. Block decided to take those 2 lots that he's intending to build as residential lots, could he then, if he changes his mind, could he then put another fourplex on those lots?
He could propose a rezoning at a later date and to rezone those 2 lots to PUD and propose a PUD plan amendment
For those 2 lots?
For those 2 lots in order to extend his development plan onto that property. But it would require the public hearing and notification of surrounding property owners.
Sure.
So.
Yep.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Block.
Thank you.
Anyone else here to speak in favor of this proposal?
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Mike Bates, Central Missouri Professional Services, 2500 East McCarty Street. We certainly appreciate the continuance. At the time it was discussed 1 or 2 months. We were generously given 2 months, and it took every bit of that to go through the meeting process and the plan development. Shortly after the P&Z meeting, we sat down with city staff to identify the plan issues, not necessarily the comprehensive plan or the density issues that city staff really thought had to be addressed to even consider this opportunity. So we did that. I'll start with a quick review of that. Major concerns were parking. One of the things that we think separates this from a traditional multifamily development and what we are proposing is an enclosed garage door for every unit. We think that changes the character of the development. There's at least 2 parking spaces off-street provided for each unit. That is the requirement for multifamily. If you built a 12-unit, 24-unit, or 36-unit structure, you're required to provide 2 off-street parking spaces per unit. That's been done here, and one of those parking spaces is enclosed. Another issue that we visited about was mail. Anytime you get into a denser type operation like this, we've been visiting with the postmaster on other projects, and there's been talk of cluster boxes. We actually visited with the postmaster's representative, Roger Bounds. We discussed the 4 boxes unit per post, and they were more than satisfied with that. So that was just one other issue. Solid waste. One of the other issues that you have to deal with, and I think it's obvious in the Ren's Addition neighborhood when you've got an RS4 zoning with the smaller lots, we've got the 2 blue containers for recycle and for the standard solid waste. We didn't really feel that was practical for a development of this nature, so we immediately set about to say how could the central facility be served. And we came up with the idea of we just simply need to eliminate a 4-plex. So we went from 7 to 6, reducing the density proposed 14%. I do want to mention, Eric, and I wasn't grading all of your comments. I think one of your density calculations actually used 28 units as opposed to the proposed 24. I've got several other corrections, but they're probably editorials, Mr. Chairman.
Just to touch on that, that was including the 4 residential lots as well.
Thank you. Did the acreage reflect that?
I believe so.
Appreciate that. The reduction of the number of units, I've touched on that. There was a question about screening. It took 2 months to get this amount of detail together. I think Ms. Shannon Block will be happy to address that. It's the neighborhood he's wanting to create. We've actually set up the solid waste station to accommodate a recycle dumpster as well as a standard waste dumpster. So that was something that he felt was important to offer his tenants. Building footprint. And I'm sure most of you, or several of you, remember Kevin Meinhardt. Kevin Meinhardt was the architect of record for the project that we used as an example that Mr. Block's family built in St. Martin's. Mr. Meinhardt died this past year. We have been given the opportunity to access his files, but we have not been able to find the plan that he had prepared. We obviously will have to retain architectural services if we move forward because the fourplex unit actually requires that type of design. So in addition to that, as we eliminated one of the buildings, and actually the first plan that we presented 2 months ago showed lots, and it wasn't the intent to separate or sell units, but it was the intent to maintain minimum subdivision requirements. So in that initial submittal, we were really looking at setbacks and making sure that we were observing all density requirements of the city. And as we went through this, one of the things we acknowledge is there's not an intent to subdivide this. It is to stay as a complex. We modified the building footprint slightly by adding 2 foot to the width and a little bit to a center section of the back. That amounts to approximately 90 square feet per unit, and I think that is in the packet. Subdivision plat was revised. The stormwater issues, we had several people testify that they had stormwater concerns. So our staff actually walked the site with Mr. Block. Surprisingly, there is a lot of good stormwater control in place, but there are a couple of areas where it is without maintenance. It's created problems over the year, and residents that back to this property are really problems being created that they really can't control. City staff in their preliminary review said we need to, number one, fix those, and number two, we need to ensure there's additional terracing as a backup system to direct stormwater. So we consider that one of the real benefits of the PUD plan. Eric, if we could, and I think we've looked at a few of the exhibits, and they're very similar in nature to what we had last time, but I'll run through those, and please feel free to ask a question if you have one. I think that number 3 that Eric had is a great one. That simply shows the overall property. Well, 3 is a similar shot, well, that's actually the plat. And you're doing great. You're doing great. If you would hold still. Exhibit 3 actually shows what would be platted. It's the corner lot at 1323 Karen and South Taylor. City staff asked us to show them that a reasonable home could be built on that after we dedicate right-of-way and combine what were 2 original in-lots. We did that without any problem to show a 1,600, I think, and 20 square foot home, which is in your packet, can be built, and it actually can be significantly bigger than that. Then, of course, lot 2 and 3, Mr. Block intends to build single-family residence on those, and then the rest of that area, lot 4, would be the fourplex. We'll point out, because it's very obvious, one of the concerns we had expressed by the neighborhood, Eric, is to the south of 1404 where there is no buffer. Can you give me a pointer there? And I'll mention this in closing, but Mr. Block, I said this is not a part of the PUD, and Shannon said, well, I'll be honest with you, I think there should be a planning buffer there for my development, including the single family as well as the residence on Wilcoxon Drive, I think it is. So in closing, I'm going to mention that that's one of the things that he is more than happy to do. Moving on to Exhibit 4. Just backs out and shows the view. Exhibit 5 is a similar view. Just moves you in. Exhibit 6 was the floor plan used for their original development. This was prepared by Mr. Meinhardt, and what we're doing will be very, very similar in nature to that with just a slight enlargement. Exhibit 7 was the footprint of that proposed enlargement. Per floor, it's 2,693 feet. That's 1,350 feet approximately per unit up and down. The next exhibit is the pictures of the development that the Block family did. And one of the things that we think, and Eric mentioned strengths and weaknesses, but it allows you to require architectural standards. If you look at these pictures, the front facade has brick veneer, and it's their proposal to brick the sides and lower level, and then framing would be on the upper back side of that. Actually, I think that looks better than all brick or framing, in that it breaks it up a little bit. Exhibit number 9 actually is something we provided you at the last meeting, and I think I told you that in particular the Wren's Addition area was a great neighborhood. This indicates what we believe are properties not occupied by the owners. And obviously in our development that's lightly shaded in the middle there will be a portion of that that's owner occupied, and then certainly a portion of it, the 7-point-some acres, that's not owner occupied, but we really think it is a transitional neighborhood. And then exhibit number 10 was just an attempt to say, hey, you know, we're not proposing to develop this in this manner, but with the 50-foot frontage requirements and 6,000 square feet for RS4 zoning and lots, you can develop smaller, cheaper homes, and we don't think that would be a benefit long-term to the city. So I want to briefly give you what we think are the positives that we believe outweigh the negatives to this development. First, it's infrastructure. Right now we've got homes, single-family homes, existing basically on an alley, and it's really not even alley standard. The improvements that are planned would give those folks a city street, full city services, and give one of the residents that exists there property that he doesn't own in front of his lot. Mr. Block has agreed to deed that to the property owner. The density proposed is comparable or less than you would see in a single-family development. The redevelopment, the development in the area will encourage, we think, other properties to redevelop, because we're looking at a significant capital investment for this. The PUD establishes density requirements, establishes architectural requirements, which are really not guaranteed to the extent that we think the neighborhood would like, and we think it's provided with the PUD. You know, at the last meeting, I talked about the MSP redevelopment plan. It is a grand plan, and it affords a lot of opportunity for Jefferson City. The critical missing link that I believe that plan does not have is a place to live. If you look at the plan, there's been no discussion where anybody would live. And I want to mention just right now, there's 3 anchors to the development: the DNR Green Building, the State Health Lab, and the Federal Courthouse. In the DNR Green Building and the State Health Lab, we have approximately 500 jobs right now, and we really haven't created any other housing. We think housing of this nature in this time is important to the community and the redevelopment of the east side. Traffic, I'm very familiar with Riverside Drive. The DNR Green Building, the State Health Lab have added traffic to that. The units that we're talking about, if you took the exact same number of units, 24 single family, 24 units in a fourplex, the Institute for Traffic Transportation Engineers are going to show you that the trip generations from the multifamily is going to be less than the single family. Environmental impact, without question, the development plan has a smaller footprint and less of a negative impact on the entire area. When we met with the neighbors, we heard people talk about wildlife. We understand that, and basically it's going to be left largely intact if the PUD is approved. Couple of other comments I would make in regard to the comprehensive plan. You know, I think it's fair. To me, the important part of a plan, it's a reference point and it's a benchmark. And it's something that you look at, and as you go through the years, the plan's there because you've got a basis of decision making whenever you deviate from that. It's the benchmark. It provides you the general direction. If I have a criticism of it, the plan was developed in 1996. I didn't ask Eric for the information, but we routinely amend the comprehensive plan because that's a part of the process. As Janice said, the comp plan is supposed to mirror our zoning ordinance. So we routinely do that, and we don't think that's a negative. The other two things that were actually offered, and Eric, can we go back to your preliminary plat and PUD plan? McKinley Street unused right-of-way. If you'd help me with the pointer there. Well, I'll proceed with the pointer or catch up. Mr. Block has committed to the neighborhood, and we've mentioned this to Eric. He's not sure how we would deal with it legally, but we've had the discussion that Mr. Block is happy to participate in the vacating of the McKinley Street right-of-way that adjoins those properties on Taylor and waive any right he has to that. So that property could actually be added to South Taylor. Typically, when you vacate a right-of-way, it's split down the middle, and the adjoining property owners receive half. So basically, in closing, I'd be happy to answer any questions. When we started out, I think it was Mr. Jordan that said, aren't we confused at the meeting 2 months ago? We're here to talk about a rezoning, and all we're talking about is the plan. Well, actually, what we needed to bring the first time was the plan. So I think we've gotten there. I mentioned the landscaping buffering behind 1404 Karen, which Mr. Block is committed to doing. The dumpster screening, which we haven't had a lot of discussion other than the city code ordinance requires that. Regardless, the commission can set standards. And then the final comment would be, of course, the vacating of McKinley Street. And then I think this is an opportunity for our community. I think if you look at the redevelopment of the East End, the Central East End, it suffers because it's impossible to put a piece of land together large enough to do anything with. This has just, to me, mutually beneficial issues with helping the infrastructure, being a very compact development, and I think it's a great opportunity. I'm back to East School is the only elementary school we have after the recent renovations that now has trailers or pods. So I've got to believe people want to live in this area, and the discussion tonight is what type of facility they want to live in. So be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions of Mr. Bates?
I have a question about the building that's to be demolished. Has there been any discussion about the historical commission looking at this? Is there going to be any problems demolishing that might hold this development up?
You know, I recently represented a demolition on Boonville Road in front of the commission, and the vote was 4-2, with 2 of the commissioners saying they would never vote to tear down a brick building. This is a frame building. The street can't be improved with the building where it's at, and I think Mr. Block would testify that the condition of the building is such that it's really not significant and worth saving. Now, that's his opinion. In addition to that, the Historic Preservation Commission has a policy and procedure in regard to residential structures, I believe, that they cannot prohibit the demolition, but they can ask you to delay for 60 or 90 days for additional discussion. Ms. McMillan or Mr.
Currently it's 60 days.
Currently 60. Which affords me, Mr. Chairman, one more opportunity. And I think Senate Court Apartments is a great example. Traditional multifamily development. I'm guessing 12 or 18 unit buildings. It's existed off of Norris Drive on the west side. Today, we wouldn't build that, probably with a PUD plan. I routinely walk through there. I live on Boonville Road, and I don't feel that's a bad development in our neighborhood. Now, that's not a development I would support here, but I truly believe, and it's on a bigger lot, I truly believe that, and to my knowledge, there are no problems with it as far as public safety or code, whatever, and staff can correct me on that if I'm wrong. We sincerely appreciate Eric's efforts to be neutral on this, although as I listened to his testimony, I truly question his definition of neutral. He did point out the positives, but if you think about the positives that I believe I see here, I think they far outweigh the negatives. And if we can do this in St. Martin's, if we can do this in Cole County, how come it can't be done in Jefferson City? Mr. Chairman, that ends my time. Thank you for yours.
Any other questions of Mr. Bates? Thank you. Is there anyone else here to speak in support of this proposal? Anyone else to speak in support of this proposal?
Hello, my name is Lashina Sewell, and right now we reside, me and my family, at the 1404 Karen Drive, with plans on buying this property from Mr. Block once this development things are come to an end here. We definitely support Shannon's plan, one, because we are a growing family, and to bring a community here. I think his plan had really support our idea of what we wanted and where we wanted to raise our family. With how the street is now, bringing it up to date and stretching it out to a normal residential street, I think is very important, because right now when we travel, it's really only wide enough for one car. And how it comes up on the hump, you can't see another car coming towards you until you're almost gonna meet, which is very unsafe on top of that. And then also, with agreeing with them with developing the East End, I think that is very important. If you look at all the rest of Jeff City, the East End is one of the most undeveloped areas. And to bring a new community there, and for families like me and my husband with 3 young children, to bring a development like this, I think would be very good for the area and the community.
Does anyone have any questions? Oh, go ahead, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And also on the ad, I heard a lot of things about traffic and things like that because of the fourplexes. A couple of slides ago that was showing how extending the streets down to Karen. Right now, Riverside Drive is a very busy street. Mainly that's the only street that goes from East High, you know, back towards the river. But if like Nelson, I don't have my glasses, but the other 2 streets, if they extend down to Karen, you know, some people might look at that as a shortcut of coming down straight through Nelson, coming up Karen Drive to get a shorter distance to River versus going all the way down to Riverside Drive to come up. So by the fourplexes being there, that's really still condensing traffic and, you know, keeping the neighborhood the way it is, enclosed, keeping the tree line, which is, you know, like I said, very good for the neighborhood.
Could we have your name for your
My name is
records? Your
Dwayne
address?
Sutton, and I live at 1404 Karen.
Did you get that, Ann? Okay. Any questions of these witnesses? Thank you. Any other proponents like to speak in favor of this proposal? Come forward, ma'am.
Good evening. I'm Lynette Woodland, and I live on 103 McKinley. I am the last house on the dead-end part of the street, and my late husband was born on Taylor Street, and his parents lived on Lincoln Street, so we have lived in the neighborhood for years and years. And I am in support of all this. I do not wish to see McKinley Street extended. I have not ever been up in that neighborhood. And about a month ago, I drove up in that neighborhood. And that house you all are talking about and referring to, that picture was very flattering, I thought. I seen the back side of it. And yeah, that one, very flattering. The back side, not so. But anyway, I have known Shannon for years. When he was a teenager, in fact. I worked with him at a lumber yard here in town, even before he was married. I feel that he's very upstanding, credit to the community. I feel like that he would do what he is proposing to do. A very good contractor, one of the best, I feel. If I had the money, I would let him build me a house. A home, in fact. I wouldn't call it house, I'd call it home. And in fact, I'd like to sell my house and maybe move into one of your places. And I do have, I'm thinking about retiring, and I do have friends. I work at one of the local hospitals here in town, thinking about retiring, and I do have friends that would probably, you know, be willing to rent some of these places. I always have friends that say, you know, do you have any places around there that we could rent? You know, always looking for places. You know, but in the neighborhood, you know, you would like to say, hey, yeah, come on over. But I would like to be able to recommend places in the neighborhood. And in fact, you know, there are places off of High Street, you know, that one little development that has the brick place that they rent. But anyway, I just want to give my all-in-all support to Shannon, because I do feel like that he, given the opportunity, if this passes, that he would do what he is proposing. And I think that it would be a good thing for the community and for the Wren's addition. And I really do not want to see McKinley Street extended. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay. Any questions of this witness? Okay. Anybody else here that would like to speak in favor of this proposal?
Go ahead.
I'm Ann Gakey, and we moved down here in 1981 from Kirksville, and it was a dirt street when we moved down. So we are very happy that Shannon's planning on making a street out there that we won't have to worry about getting bumped into, or when there's a rummage sale, there's no room for people to pass. It's awful. So we're hoping that it does go through.
Ann, could we have your address, please? We didn't get that.
1400 Karen Drive.
Okay.
And
We bought it from the original owner, Buell. It was his mother-in-law's house.
Okay. Any questions of this witness?
I was going to ask, which house is it? Is it the first one on Karen Drive, or the second one right next to Mr. Block's?
It's the next one where Buell Backley lived. It was his mother-in-law's house.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It was Buell Backley's mother-in-law's house.
Oh,
Mrs. Butler's. And that's why we don't have a street, you know, we don't have the right of way to the street or anything. Because he had kept that in case if he wanted to extend in order to, you know, make the street wider if it needed to.
okay. It's the first, that one.
Yeah, the 1400, right next to,
Oh,
right
this
next to
one.
1404.
Right there. Okay. Sorry.
Thank you. Any other proponents?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Ed Gray. That's E-D-G-R-A-Y for the warrants. I live at 111 Pierce Street, which is the second property up Pierce Street. I would encourage you to adopt the PUD plan because it protects this greenery area down below our house, which would protect be 117, 111, 113, Jackie Kirkwood's property, as well as my neighbor, Mr. Heidbrink, across the street. The pond. You say you're gonna retain that pond back there. The only thing I'd recommend is you get rid of the Canadian geese, because it decorated my car the other night. But, no, we do have deer up in there. We had muskrat last night, as a matter of fact, I saw one. So, you know, maybe we can get somebody from the highway patrol over there with it. Never mind, I'll leave it at that. Thank you, appreciate it.
Any questions of Mr. Gray? Thank you. Anyone else here that would like to speak in favor of this proposal? Anyone else to speak in favor? Seeing no one else, is there anyone here who would like to speak in opposition to this proposal?
Good evening. My name is Jason Spruill. I live at 1411 Wilcoxon. I've been a resident and a homeowner there for over 10 years. And part of the attraction for me to the neighborhood was the nostalgia. It has a lot of history. A lot of people that's on Wilcox is retired. It's a very quiet, close-knit neighborhood. Our backyards are generally used for, you know, a lot of entertainment, a lot of relaxing. Where Mr. Block has the property development at, in my backyard, I will see headlights throughout the night shining on my property. That's about 200 feet or so, and that's concerning to me. And I'm just looking at the inconsistent transition of people in the property. I understand there's a need for development, but there's some concern as far as the inconsistency, the noise, things of that nature. The wildlife and things like that is very important, because that's a part of the attraction to the neighborhood, because you have a lot of, you know, some natural things that's taking place. I think that will force some of the wildlife out of that area down into the people that's adjacent to the property. Could create some concern there. So that's some of the concerns I have with the property development there. That's all I have.
Any questions of this witness? Thank you. Anyone else here who would like to speak in opposition to this proposal, please come forward.
My name is Catherine Elliott. I live at 116 South Taylor. We live right catty corner to the White House that they were previously talking about. We've lived there since 1965. Of course, when we moved there, the neighbors were younger families that were raising their children, and now many of the neighbors are elderly, but we've also had people who have sold their homes in the past recent years, so we do have younger families moving in with children. We only live a couple of blocks from the East School entrance on High Street, and a couple blocks further, like 4 blocks away, from the Catholic Parochial School on McCarty Street. So there is considerable traffic, with walking traffic, I should say, with children walking to and from school. And this is a single-family neighborhood and has been, you know, I don't know, for 100 years. I mean, when we moved into that neighborhood, it was already a well-established neighborhood. So children have, you know, people have moved in with children back in 1965. Their children are now gone, raised many years, and now they have grandchildren. But like I said, there's been new families young families moved in with young children. They've invested in this property with the knowledge that this was a single family neighborhood. It's rich in the history of single family neighborhoods. You know, the yards are not extremely wide, so the houses are close together. You know, you walk outside, you wave to your neighbor in passing, have a few words. there's also, along with the children, they have their pets that follow them up and down the street. And so I'm concerned about the traffic with a multifamily dwelling just a few hundred yards from our house. And I'm concerned what it will do to the neighborhood. I know there is a need for multifamily apartment houses, but I don't think it should be put in an area where the city has already zoned that area for multifamily dwellings, not into a single family neighborhood where people have invested their lives into their homes. Thank you.
Any questions of this witness? Thank you. Anyone else that would like to speak in opposition to this proposal?
Good evening. My name is Kim Haller. My husband and I own the property at 107 South Taylor. Our property actually backs up to the pond. At the first meeting, and our concern still remains the same about the traffic on Karen Drive. Coming in from Riverside Drive, there are no existing sidewalks there. Currently on Karen, there is only parking on one side of the street, and I understand that it's going to continue that way, or that's what they're proposing. But we're still concerned about the amount of traffic that'll flow in and out from there. And actually, with people, with the development, with the PUD, planned unit development, concerns about even coming off of Riverside Drive, because the traffic has grown there for that first block from High Street to Karen. And the fact that it is near the school zone and such, that maybe parking would be eliminated on one side of Riverside too, to make it easier to get in and out that way. We have the option, obviously, of going up to Huff Street and coming out, but I think with the 6 fourplexes, we were calculating that it'd be a minimum of another 50 to 60 vehicles, if you will, that'll be traveling that 2 or 3 block distance. The fact of the matter is, if we had our way, we would have liked for the property not to have been sold, no offense, and that it would stay the way that it is. We've lived there for 26 years, but it has been sold. We think a development will be positive in the sense that we're basing our opinion on Mr. Block's history and the product that he's already put out in our community. We would prefer that McKinley Street didn't come up through our backyard. That's all I have to say. The traffic remains our #1 issue. Otherwise, we have no concerns.
Okay, any questions of this witness? Thank you.
Yes.
You know, if this is passed, McKinley would never come open. None of the streets would ever be open.
Right, if the planned unit development goes through.
If it doesn't pass, he does have the option, if he wants to develop that lower end, to make it open.
And I do understand that. I appreciate that. And, you know, because we've had the discussion at our home and with our neighbors that we would still be able to have green in our backyard. We'd be looking at a new street, and there'd be a neighbor on the opposite side of the street. And if he had to do the single-family homes, I would assume that the pond would disappear. For me, it's not really a problem. My children are grown. When Mr. Backley's first excavated for it, I thought I was going to have a coronary. But, you know, my kids learned that it's not their property. They probably went over there without my knowledge of it, but nobody was hurt, and I appreciate that. I know close friends live at the bottom of the hill below the pond on the other side of the creek on McKinley Street. My children grew up with their children, and over the years, that runoff, if you will, or for whatever reason, the creek has deteriorated, and there's a lot of issues with that. So for somebody who lives on the lower side of that property, especially along that, they may have great concerns. And maybe on Wilcoxon Drive, I know at the last meeting people talked about the runoff and stuff. We don't have that issue in our backyard. We live on a hill, so that's happened naturally, because Taylor Street goes down to the bottom where the creek is, and then it goes back up. But the traffic's just our #1 issue.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else that would like to speak in opposition to this proposal?
I'm Michelle Malone. I live at 104 McKinley. And my concern, my husband and I concern, we've lived there for 27 years. Our number one concern is, and we still have that, is the runoff off of that hill and his planned development. The pond was developed, like Ms. Haller said, was Mr. Backley's development. Since the pond came in, it restructured the runoff off that hill. I've had so many calls to the city about what they call the runoff. It's never, whenever I call the city, called a creek. It's a city runoff, and it's never been repaired. It continues to take out my yard. Several of the people down that whole runoff have lost yard. I've talked to them. Mike Moore concerned, I believe he'll develop it the way he is, but my concern is the runoff off of that hill and what will be proposed and how it will prevent land ownership down at the bottom of that hill and all along that runoff from losing land again, and what will be done about that. And that's why I'm in opposition to it.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else that would like to speak in opposition to this proposal?
Good evening, I'm Mark Holterman. I live due east of the property on 100 South Lincoln. I apologize for the way I'm dressed. I had to take my boy to the doctor all of a sudden this afternoon, and I didn't get home in time change, so I apologize. I'm in opposition to this because I believe it's going to lower my property value. These apartments will lower my property value. If you lower the property value of all the houses around there, that's less money for the city, and the city is strapped for cash the way it is. I like to see it stay as a family dwelling in that area because I've lived there for 24 years. I like the area. I really like the area, I really do. And I like for it to stay as a single family dwelling. And I do have one question. I know it's not considered with this, but with the old sewage, the way it is now, is the sewage going to be able to handle all the extra sewage? Since I live below the hill, you know, everything runs downhill, and I don't want my back up in my house. Because only in front of my house is just an 8-inch main. Is that sewer system able to handle all the extra sewage? Because I build houses myself, and sometimes they won't let us to build houses because they say the sewage, you cannot build because we cannot add any more lines to the sewer system.
Okay. Engineering, are you all comfortable that it can handle it?
Yes.
Okay. Engineering department says it can handle it, sir.
Okay. I just really don't want those apartments in my backyard, and that's how I feel.
Any questions of this witness?
I have a
Chris?
question. Would you prefer that there were single-family houses in your backyard?
I would prefer nothing, really.
Well, that may not be an option.
I know, I understand that. I understand that, yes.
It's why it's just, I mean, you said you didn't want the fourplexes. I was just curious which was more desirable or which was more palatable for you.
For me, either one, to be honest with you, because I just put addition on the back of my house a year ago to enjoy the backwoods. And I realize, and I know it's not mine, but I've come from the country, and that's one of the reasons I bought the...
I have the same situation.
That's one of the reasons I bought the property, because of the big hill behind me, and I got a little bit of the country and the city, so...
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else here opposed?
Hi, my name is Karen Elliott. I live at 116 South Taylor. I live across from the house, little white house he was saying was so bad. It's not so bad. He's remodeled it just a couple years ago, refixed the whole inside, put new siding on. But anyway, I have a lot of concern about the traffic from Taylor Street to Riverside. That's a small street, like she said, only parking on one side. You can't even go 2 cars down that street. You have to stop, we'll let 1 car go down, and then you can go back down to Riverside. So there's not enough room for traffic. And I don't really care about having the duplexes back there. If he wants to put single-family housing, I'd be more concerned about that than having the duplexes. I want the single family. You know, it's just the type of people maybe that you'd get back there, single family, than the duplexes. And also, Gordon Street, it's right up there where that single family housing is. It's a dead end. Why don't he open that up and have more traffic going out Gordon Street if he wants to do it? Because there's just not enough room to go out between Karen Street and Riverside. There needs to be more places for 24, 48 more cars to go out that street. That's my concern. Thank you.
Anyone else here who would like to speak in opposition to this proposal? Anyone else opposed?
I didn't get a letter in the mail. I didn't get any notice. And there's a lot of people I think that didn't get a notice. On Polk Street, I've talked to a lot of my neighbors, even on Taylor Street, on my side, nobody knew about it. And though I've talked to those people, I wish I got a petition, and they're not wanting it either. They couldn't come because all of them are sick or elderly, but they're not really wanting those either. Even the guy on the other side of me, on both sides. And he's on the corner of Taylor and Karen, and doesn't want that either. So, thank you.
Do you want to address that, Eric?
Yes, we do follow state law in terms of providing notification to surrounding property owners. That law is that all the property owners within 185 feet of the rezoning proposal receive a letter in the mail. If a person doesn't own the property, is simply living there, they won't get a letter. In this case, I believe that she lives greater than 185 feet away from the portion of the property that's proposed for rezoning. The portion of the property that's fronting up against Taylor, and let me go down to this screen, it's basically everyone within 185 feet of the area outlined in green gets a letter in the mail. The areas outlined in yellow are not being proposed for rezoning. They are being proposed for single-family residential use. We do not send notifications out for plats. The portion of the property in yellow is being proposed as a plat, not as for rezoning. This is very similar as if the property were to be developed as a single-family subdivision, no one would receive notices. And so in that manner, only the people that are within 185 feet of the portion of the property being rezoned got notices. That's a state law. We're not allowed to deviate from that because it can be challenged by the developer.
Let me explain it to you. You're probably within 180 feet of the plat, but you're not within 180 feet of the rezoning. Anyone else opposed? Anyone else in opposition to this proposal? Seeing none, we will close the public testimony. Staff report.